So thanks again for joining the scoping comment party about the Southeast Supply Enhancement Project, which is a newly proposed pipeline from Williams Transco. Again, my name is Jessica Sims. I'm the Virginia Field Coordinator with Appalachian Voices. Tonight, you're going to hear from some great colleagues and advocates who are working to educate others about this project and to oppose this project. You'll hear from Mason Manley from Chesapeake Climate Action Network, from Jacqueline Goodrum from Wild Virginia, and Claire Spear of 7 Directions of Service. We are also being helped. Thank you to Russell Chisholm, who is helping us with tech support this evening. So again, tonight's program is being recorded. So you can turn your camera off if you don't want to have your picture showing. And please put any questions in the chat. Please be sure to keep your line muted to cut down on background noise. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the program. So again, ask questions as they come to mind. All of the items and resources that you see this evening will be sent to you tomorrow or possibly later this evening. So you have the materials you need to weigh in on the Southeast Supply Enhancement Project. Mason's going to give you some information about the project so we're all on the same page about what it is, where it is, and what it means. I'm going to talk to you about the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which is the federal agency that reviews interstate pipeline projects and usually grants them a permit. But we're in the middle of a public comment opportunity right now. Jackie is going to talk about the best practices for drafting a comment and how you can make an effective impact on the agencies and regulators who review what you see. As we are in a scoping comment period, this is a chance for you to submit detailed site-specific comments about the project and its potential impacts. Claire's going to talk to us about talking points and the things you might want to bring up in your comment. I'm going to round it out with how to navigate the FERC website and actually submit your comment before we use the remainder of the hour for taking questions, talking about ways to engage on this process, and then potentially working on drafting our comments. So I'm excited to pass it over to my colleague Mason to talk to you about the Southeast Supply Enhancement Project. And thanks again for being here.
Thank you, Jess. Yes, so Transco is owned indirectly by the Williams companies. And this group of companies has proposed an expansion of their existing pipeline into the Southeast US. And this expansion project will include more pipeline adjacent to the existing Transco corridor and modifications to 8 facilities along the route. The expansion is going to take place in Virginia, the Carolinas, Georgia, and Alabama, and would expand Transco's existing system by just under 1.6 million decatherms per day. And to put that into context, that is roughly the same amount of gas that the Atlantic Coast Pipeline would have transported if we hadn't got it canceled. Our focus tonight is going to be on the Eden Loop, which is denoted in red. That loop is 26.3 miles of 42-inch pipeline, around 20 of which are in Virginia, and that pipeline will run adjacent to the current right-of-way. It will also include, this loop, two 22,500 horsepower compressor units in Chatham, Virginia, equal to one big, huge new compressor station. The Salem Loop, which is denoted on the map in orange, is going to be 28.3 miles of the same diameter pipe, 42 inches, also adjacent to the current right-of-way, and that will be in Rockingham, Guilford, Forsyth, and Davidson counties. New compressor units will be located in Cleveland, Iredell, and Davidson counties, and you'll see those at stations 145, 150, and 155 on the map. Next slide, please. So where is this gas going to go and why? So 2/3 of the gas would go to Duke Energy's proposed massive gas build-out in the Carolinas. Duke has one of the largest planned methane gas build-outs of any utility in the nation. And 1/3 of the gas is proposed to go even further south to other utilities planning to build out more gas infrastructure in the Southeast US as well. Duke's proposed methane infrastructure would force residents in North Carolina into decades of obligation to pay volatile fuel prices while putting us all at risk of putting, people who are paying bills at risk of stranded asset costs and increased risk to health, water, air, and climate, right, which will impact all of us, regardless of whether we're in North Carolina or in Virginia along the route. And we know there are much more affordable options that utilize existing proven technologies like utility scale solar paired with battery storage and a greater emphasis on energy efficiency. And once wind and solar facilities are up and running, there's no additional fuel cost and no fuel cost fluctuation, unlike with this huge gas build out that we're seeing across the Southeast. Next slide, please, Jess. So some of our concerns about this expansion project. Overall, SSEP is a great concern, both regionally, nationally, and internationally from a climate standpoint. Talking specifically about health, water, and air quality, methane leaks are common throughout the production and distribution system, at wellheads, along pipelines, at compressor stations, in homes, and in businesses. And these leaks pollute water and soil. Methane is a potent greenhouse gas and a major contributor to global warming and extreme weather. From a safety standpoint specifically, though infrequent, pipelines have been known to explode without warning, causing injury, loss of life, and millions of dollars in damages in many circumstances. And Transco's SSEP evacuation zone is going to be 3,700 feet on both sides of the pipeline. And we know from past examples that emergency first responders, especially in the rural areas that this expansion will pass through, often do not possess the assets, resources, training, nor personnel to properly respond to a catastrophic explosion or leak of a pipeline of this scale. Next slide, please. From an economic standpoint, this is a bad deal. Many studies have recently shown that Virginia, the Carolinas, and many other states have more than enough existing infrastructure to meet the maximum gas demand all the way through 2030. And this expansion project is only going to create a few, if any, permanent jobs, and almost all the temporary job opportunities will likely be filled by workers from out of the state. And in fact, Transco actually admitted limited economic benefits, stating, quote, "The benefits of the project are not realized by those who are impacted. Instead, the impacts are borne by those whose properties are impacted, and benefits are seen by those outside the project area. Therefore, the risk is that impacted areas are not swayed by economic benefits, including jobs, additional natural gas, and very limited tax revenues," end quote. Next slide, please. Where do landowners stand on this in terms of impacts? So land agents hired by Transco could present the project, and likely will, in my opinion, as a done deal in an attempt to gain access to private lands so that FERC will look more favorably on the project. Some pipeline companies try to provide minimal compensation for land or end up using eminent domain to take the land if landowners refuse to cooperate. And I'm going to pass it back to Jess, who will talk us through what the permitting for this would look like and the timeline.
Thanks, Mason. So we know this project is underway. So I'm going to talk to you about the timeline that's been proposed and is happening and has been adjusted a little bit. But in winter of last year, Williams Transco began their initial public outreach. And we are thankful that landowners along the route let others know what was happening. Their outreach is to those along the route, but also to community leaders and elected officials to try and create the narrative that the project is needed and is helpful and is unharmful to the climate and our environmental future. So they pre-filed with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission at the beginning of this year, and that kind of kicks off the process at the federal level. We're in a period right now where they've pre-filed and now they're in scoping, where the FERC staff gather comments from the public to help them determine what they should analyze. FERC creates an environmental impact statement or an environmental assessment, and they use all of the great comments, suggestions, and specific concerns about places, cultural resources, historic resources, and water resources that are mentioned in scoping comments to help them determine what to review. The anticipated schedule on the FERC side of things is that they would be filing their application later this year. And the company has announced that they have a target construction date of spring 2026 and a target in-service date. We know from experience in other projects, those timelines rarely hold. Between now and then, there are also many state-level permits that they would need. So as I mentioned, they have to get a FERC Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity. This is their federal level permit. Sometimes you'll hear it called a CPCN. And since we are focused tonight on Virginia and North Carolina, what they would need in Virginia is also a Clean Water Act permit. This is under Section 401 of the Clean Water Act, and that's because the pipe itself is such a large diameter. Because the Southeast Supply Enhancement Project, or SSEP, would have a 42-inch diameter pipe, certain requirements come into play at the state level permitting. They would also need an upland certification. In North Carolina, they would also need that same kind of permit. They would need a Jordan Lake Riparian Protection Buffer and Randleman Lake Riparian Protection Buffer. And then they'd need air permits for any gas run compressor station upgrades. We have learned, thank you to a helpful landowner who flagged it in the resource reports, that their intention is to electrify the Virginia station. What is not shown on this slide are other federal permits. When they get a Section 401 Clean Water Act permit, it is in conjunction with the Army Corps of Engineers. So there are many, many remaining local, state, and federal permits before this process can begin. So let's zoom out a little bit. Many on this call are very familiar with FERC, but if you've never heard of it, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, it's a 5-member commission that falls under the Department of Transportation that oversees the regulation and permitting of methane gas pipelines, transmission lines. And there are, at this time, only 3 members seated. It is a 5-member commission. The nominations are made by the president and then go through congressional hearings and review and then acceptance or not. So we're at a moment where there's 2 sitting commissioners, 1 who's leaving a term, and this week there'll be a hearing about the 3 new nominated commissioners. So even if there's only 3 people on the commission, they can still make decisions that would or wouldn't grant permits. And we saw that happen with the Atlantic Coast and Mountain Valley pipelines. They have approved, unfortunately, 99% of all projects that have asked for permits. As evidenced by that percentage, it's very rare for them to do otherwise. But the information that you help provide in your public comment, whether at the scoping period as an intervener or in responding to the draft environmental impact statement, can have a pivotal role in what is needed down the road to help fight this project. So please don't be discouraged by that number. Your voice is really needed in this process. FERC hasn't been around that long. So like I said, they're doing transmission lines. They're working on regulating wholesale electricity prices. They are reviewing proposals year-round about interstate, which is a pipeline which crosses state lines, gas storage, and liquid natural gas terminals, and then some licensing of non-federal hydropower projects. So they do cover a lot. As I said, they can make decisions with only 3 people there. They have a monthly in-person meeting where they're reviewing some of the items before them. If there is a certificate that is under review and a decision point is coming, sometimes their meetings will cover that. As mentioned, the SSEP has already began its pre-filing process. That's what starts the application. That's when outreach is happening. And then applicants, in this case, Williams Transco, host open houses where you can meet with staff, see maps that are subject to change, and then get information about the project and hopefully have some of your questions answered. The examples here are people at other open houses meeting with staff. There is a requirement for them to hold these open houses. This period has finished. Those were in March, early spring, and we are now in a scoping period. So scoping, there's, scoping out what they need to consider when they make their environmental assessment. When something is assigned to FERC and it's in a pre-filing status, it has a docket number. So think of FERC's website as a big online library for lots of different dockets specific to projects. SSEP's pre-filing docket number is on the screen there, PF24-2. Sometimes you have to do the -000, but you'll use that information when you submit your comment. Scoping is really important because it helps FERC staff know what should be reviewed. It can sometimes have an accompanying intervention period, which is someone who is directly impacted by the project can participate in the FERC process as an intervener. And that gives them a little more access to information and standing down the line. When you're submitting a scoping comment, it's so helpful for you to be as specific as possible and to list environmental issues local to your area, local to your property, or important cultural and historic resources that they may not have done in their review of the route. Typically, a scoping period has meetings that are put together by FERC. That this has not been the case for the SSEP. They held one via phone and never announced any of the typical in-person scoping meetings that FERC is required to have. So we are very surprised by that and do anticipate that this comment period may be extended. But I will mention, we're in scoping right now. They only gave us 30 days. So we are working from that sort of worst case scenario timeline, which means comments are due by this Friday, June 6th at 4:59 p.m. So you'll have all the tools to help submit that. And one of the best ways to start is to understand how to put together an effective public comment. So and that's Thursday, thank you. Mason, oh, I'm telling her. So Thursday, June 6th at 4:59 p.m. I'll now pass it to Jackie to talk about how to write an effective public comment.
Hi, folks. My name is Jackie Goodrum, and I am with Coalition Partner Wild Virginia. I am also a lecturer at the University of Virginia, where I teach a course on public commenting. Tonight, I'm going to share some techniques and tips with you for writing effective comments. And my hope is that you will come away encouraged and excited to comment, and that you'll have a better sense for how to communicate your knowledge, experience, and opinions in order to influence environmental decision-making. So, effective comment is clear, concise, and convincing. These are the 3 words that I want you to remember if you remember nothing else from my presentation. Effective comments include relevant factual information, sound legal or scientific reasoning, and supporting evidence or authority, and it connects the decision that the agency is trying to make to the impacts to you, your family, or your community. Now, effective comments have the potential to influence environmental decision-making. It's not that they necessarily will. And this is a really important part of the environmental review process, scoping, to actually try to influence the agency's decision. Because it's so early on in the environmental review process, it increases the likelihood that you will be able to influence the agency's review and their ultimate decision by telling them what they need to look at and why. By commenting now, you're providing invaluable information to the agency at the beginning before they've expended significant time and resources assessing the project's impacts and coming to their own conclusions about those impacts. And it's much harder to get the agency to go back and look at things when you're commenting on the environmental review after they've already done it. So let's tell them now what they need to look at and why. Next slide, Jess. So an effective comment is a clear comment. So you want to make your comment clear. And the reason you want to do that is because agency officials are reading hundreds, if not thousands, of comments. You want your comment to be easy to read. You want your message to be clear so that they can easily understand what you are trying to say. So some tips for making your comment clear: you need to think about what you're going to say before you start writing. It's just like in school where you needed to plan before writing an essay. It's great if you are able to do that here for writing a comment. You gather your necessary information and facts. A lot of that information is being provided to you tonight, so that should hopefully make it easy. A clear comment is an organized comment. It should have, can think of like the 5-paragraph essay. You can have an introduction, body paragraphs, and a conclusion. It looks organized. You're able to organize your thoughts, and it reads well. And use ordered lists if applicable: first, second, third, 1, 2, 3. This is one way to help your comments stay organized and also make your points clear. Next slide. You also want to make your comment concise. An effective comment is concise. Use only as many words as necessary. Typical grammar and writing rules apply. Avoid run-on sentences. Avoid dense paragraphs of text. And again, the reason you want to make your comment concise is the agency officials are getting hundreds, thousands of comments. They're reading a lot. If you have a really long comment that's voluminous, it's going to be harder for them to get through it, and they might give up reading altogether. Now, that's not to say just write one sentence or even one paragraph. It's okay if you don't have a lot to say. Maybe just aim for 1 page or 5 paragraphs. But it's not enough just to say in a sentence or 1 paragraph that you just oppose the project. You also need to give the agency your reason why you oppose a project, because by doing so, you're also giving the agency reasons and evidence that they should consider in denying or approving a permit. Also, if you have reports or photographs or additional scientific data or maps or any sort of background information, you can mention this in the body of your comment, but it might be best if you have a lot of that to include it in an appendix rather than in the comment body in order to keep the comment concise. All right, next slide, Jess. And finally, an effective comment is a convincing comment. And so convincing comments are persuasive comments. And there's different ways to use what you're writing to convince or persuade the agency. And a key one that I like to highlight is asserting your authority early. So what this means is that in your introduction, in your comment, you're going to introduce yourself and also tell the agency why you have the authority to comment. And what I mean by that is you're answering that question of who you are and why should they listen to you. What knowledge or experience do you hold that is worth them valuing? Now, this can be professional or personal experience or knowledge, and the more specific, local, and detailed you can get here with this introduction and assertion of authority, the better. And obviously, talking about your experience or your knowledge, it shows your authority to comment because you're either an expert or you're directly or indirectly impacted by the agency's decision. And it just lends weight to your comment. It makes it more persuasive and therefore more convincing. And in order to illustrate this, you'll want to use relevant facts and examples. Another way to make your comment convincing is use because statements. And this is just a writing technique for linking the assertion you're making to the evidence that supports your assertion. You also want to show, don't tell. And again, this is another writing technique. What I mean by this is use descriptions and imagery, not just tell the agency that this project will harm, or in the past, pipeline projects have harmed water resources. Describe that harm. What did that harm look like in detail? That's one way to show the harm that is occurring rather than telling them. And finally, and this is really important, a convincing, persuasive comment avoids personal insults and attacks. And it feels silly to say that, but I review comments regularly for the course that I teach, and I always can find examples of individuals writing insulting comments that directly attack agency officials. Now, you're not going to change somebody's mind or persuade them to make a change that you want, or even perhaps to finish reading your comment if you are calling them names, telling them they're stupid, and ultimately you'll fail to be heard. Now, cautioning against personal attacks is different from critiquing, and we need to distinguish those. When you're critiquing the agency's decision or the agency's action, you're highlighting errors and omissions that they have made. And you're also reminding the agency of the duties that they have under the law. But you're supporting all of those claims with relevant facts and law if appropriate. You're not personally attacking them. You're attacking what they're doing. So the outcome of personal insults is that your comment is not going to positively influence agency decision-making. So you want to avoid personally insulting the agency or any of the decision makers, even if you are angry about the project and you oppose the project. And so those are just my techniques and tips for how to write an effective comment. Just remember, clear, concise, and convincing. And back to you, Jess.
Thanks so much. So Jackie's laid out some best practices for how to draft a comment. And I'm going to turn it now to Claire, who's going to talk about some of the things to highlight in your comment. Take it away, Claire.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Hope y'all are doing well and able to I know we've got a lot of really good information coming at you. Hope you're able to just digest it. My name's Claire. I'm the field organizer with 7 Directions of Service. And just to recap on a couple of key things before I move into these talking points, things that we've already talked about, excuse me, I need some water, is that the scoping period is for, as Jess has said, cultural, historical, and environmental concerns. So that's something to really keep in mind. And as we've been talking about, specificity is really going to impact how they receive and how they read your comment. And I wanted to just read, this is actually from FERC's website about scoping. They say that affected property owners and other stakeholders can provide detailed comments about issues pertaining to their properties, just like we've been saying. For example, stakeholders, meaning you all, can provide information on sensitive environmental features in the project area. You can also suggest alternatives to be evaluated, or you can help identify construction constraints. So just coming from them, there's a couple of ideas. And then I know we have this slide that really lays out things concerning, that are really specific to scoping. And I'll go through a couple of those things. So first you'll have the water impacts, right? Now I have personally talked to more than one landowner who has a freshwater spring or some sort of body of water going through their property. That is huge. That is something that needs to be highlighted. That is absolutely a concern. And I would put that, kind of at the top of your comment if you can, with the specificity that Jackie was talking about. Other than that, we don't know the exact number of water bodies the new sections of pipeline will have to cross, but we do know they may go through at least the Dan River and the Sandy River. So if you're close to one of those water bodies or even a creek that's off of it, definitely connect your concern to that. Constructing through or underwater bodies can carry different risks of erosion, sedimentation, and or spills of construction fluids. Those could really harm water quality as well as aquatic life. Another great talking point for scoping is the air pollution. And where do we see this? With construction. Also with these new compressor units, the ones that are either being built or being enlarged. Some of them are going to be electric motor driven, as we heard, but some of them will run on gas. Though these compressor stations are dangerous, they emit a lot of harmful pollutants into the air, including carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, particulate matter, and formaldehyde, which none of us want to be breathing. As well as being irritants, they can actually cause long-standing and turn into chronic issues, respiratory issues like asthma. Moving on to the climate impacts. And again, just want to say, if there's anything else that you can think of specific to you, your property, your land, as I'm talking, please feel free to jot this stuff down. And these are great ways to just start forming your comment. As far as the climate in general, we're looking at a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. This project will cause tens of millions of downstream greenhouse gas emissions every year for decades, even as we're looking at the cost of renewable energy dropping. So because of this, there's a good chance that ratepayers will continue paying for this pipeline long after the power plant it supplies become obsolete. The North Carolina executive order commits the federal government to achieving net zero emissions economy-wide by 2050. We also have a clean energy plan that sets a goal of attaining carbon neutrality by 2050. This project directly opposes and impedes both of these objectives. It is estimated that the new extraction and use of 1,587 decatherms a day of gas would amount to about 60 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions per year. That's every year it operates. And that is equivalent to the annual emissions from about 16 coal plants or 13 million gasoline-powered cars. It's huge. So, basically what we're looking at is water, air, the climate impacts, as well as environmental justice. What that means is really looking at the demographics and just socioeconomic sphere of where they're putting these pipelines. Now, we need more investigation and details about each site, but according to EPA's EG Screen mapping tool, which is publicly available online, at least one of the gas-powered compressor stations in Davidson County, North Carolina, that Transco is planning to expand is near an area that is above the 70th percentile statewide for low-income residents. That is something that is not uncommon, that we see a lot with these pipelines, that they're not putting them through million-dollar home subdivisions. That's usually people who are low income and already impacted by more pollution, and for decades have seen just detrimental impacts to their health and to their well-being from being taken advantage of by corporations like this. As far as the last thing that you can look at is concerns about the procedure itself. As Jess had mentioned, no in-person sessions were announced. They said they were going to do it. That is a promise that they are not standing behind. That should be a concern. Communities have not had enough time to review filings, as some were only recently posted. So that's pretty much an overview. Again, I know it's a lot, but we have, guides and more about these talking points available and resources that we will continue to share with you. So don't feel like you have to remember everything I said. Hopefully you jotted some things down, and I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Jess.
Mayor, thanks so much. And I want to flag a question in the chat about obligations on ratepayers. This is most especially pertinent for those in North Carolina. And so I want to flag that. And if we can also share, one of the resources you'll be using to help draft your comment is a guide that Mason has put together from CCAN. So we're going to put that in the chat too. We'll have the PowerPoint available for you, this recording. Anything that's in the chat, you will get via email. So don't sweat having to grab it. And sorry, there was a spelling error on that last slide. The word is overburdened, not overburned. But really appreciate what Claire brought up. So as I go into this sort of boring technical thing about how to use the FERC website, I do, and you're already doing it in the chat, want you to please start thinking about what topic do you think you'd want to have within your scope and comment. Claire made that suggestion, but start getting an idea of 2 or 3 things you think it would be important to you to mention. And one of the things, I do want to flag too about what is so frustrating about FERC's processes that they're generally very difficult to navigate. They are very opaque. This is seemingly so. Part of what was suggested 40 some years ago, maybe more, was an Office of Public Participation for FERC. That's supposed to be the liaisons that are helping us, but it only just got funding a couple years ago. And so that is another place at ferc.gov where you can look for resources on how to submit, but we're going to provide some for you too. What is frustrating is that often the public comment periods that they put out there to the world have very short timelines. We've seen them as short as 15 days. The scoping one is 30 days, which included holidays and weekends and a very busy time with graduation and lots of things going on. So I'm just going to walk you through how to use the FERC website, especially if you've never done it. And then I'm going to put it back to Claire, who's going to talk about some of the other ways you can stay engaged and then help walk you through the main coalition site we've been using. So if you were to want to submit an e-comment, which in that case is just a written comment, no filing, no picture, anything like that, no attachments, but we will provide information on how to submit those. If you want to just do a written comment, you can use an e-comment feature, which is a two-step but easier process from the FERC website. So if you were to visit ferc.gov and you were to scroll down to the bottom of the page, there's something called e-comment. When you click on that, it's going to bring up a website that's sort of step one of submitting your comment. You'd fill this information out, and please note that your name and your city are going to be displayed publicly. So keep that in mind. Your address, your email, your zip code, your phone number will not be shown. But when you do make your comment, it is going into a public library where anyone can see it. So just be mindful of that. This is the first step that you'll do. You'll fill it out with an email address, and then FERC sends you a link. One thing to really think about, because FERC's website can time you out, it can crash, it can sometimes not be working, is drafting your scoping comment in something else, in a Word document, on a piece of paper, in a Google document. Have it somewhere else so that you can just cut and paste it for the next step. But once you get that link in your email, you're going to open it up, and then it's going to take you to this next page. You're going to have to select a docket to affiliate your comment with. And that's when you're going to bring up that PF 24-2-000. You would type that into the area that says enter docket number, hit search, and then click on the blue plus mark beside it. That brings it down and connects that docket to your comment. So you can see with the lower two arrows, you've got a selected docket. You're making sure it's the right one. And then your comment is going to list your name and your town. And then within the body of this text box, which you can see takes up to 6,000 characters, you're going to submit your scoping comment. This is where you can share information about waterways, cultural resources, potentially endangered species or imperiled species, and your overall concerns. FERC staff review every comment that goes into the docket. So the example I have is when the comment period opened, I submitted a comment asking for more time. I did that again this weekend because they are introducing new filings from the company, just a week from the deadline, which is really not a fair way to do it. So you can ask for them to extend the comment period at the same time you share your concerns. So it's really clicking e-comment on the FERC website, which sends you an email, and then you fill out your comment when you access that link. We have a how-to guide that Mason's put together. If you do want to do a longer filing with an attachment or pictures of certain areas or relevant data, we have a different guide that will walk you through that step, which is a little more labor intensive, but also navigable. And we as staff of organizations opposing this project are happy to walk you through that one-on-one if needed. So you've got the materials that you need to start thinking about what you want to say. You've got your best practices for how to submit a comment. You understand the project sort of overall much better, and you have those specific talking points that Claire mentioned that you can highlight. So what I want to do now is I'm going to turn it to Claire, who's going to share their screen and show you a coalition website we've been using where a lot of this great info is placed. So I will say, if we do hear there are in-person meetings for scoping, you will be told, but we really suggest that you stay connected with the groups represented here today and continue to visit nossep.org. So at this time, I'm going to stop sharing so that Claire can share their screen.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. Give me one moment. So I'm pulling up nossep.org, which, as just said, has been the basically kind of main hub for a lot of information about these projects. And I just wanted to very briefly go through how to find our next steps on this site. First, I want to say that everything I'm about to show you can all be found in a very nice, neatly put together, condensed version, the engagement guide that Mason dropped. So definitely feel free to use that. It's a powerful resource. If you are more familiar with the website format or just want to know how to navigate, I'll show you how to do that really quickly right now. So I just scrolled down towards the bottom. You go past our upcoming events, and while you're scrolling, you take a gander and see what's coming up next. And then you find this drop down, what can you do right now? And each of these will give you a different action and point you towards a different action to take. So this is what we're doing right now. We're talking through scoping, participating in the scoping comments, and you can sign our petition by clicking this link here. Now, you just have to wait a little bit. As you can see, this informational document is loading. Scroll down, it'll give you some information, and then this red button is your click to sign. This page also has a lot of good information and goes through a lot of the talking points that I went over today. So that's an easy way to remind yourself of what you want to say and get some of those specific details that are going to make your comment really powerful. Know your rights. This is an FAQs page. I won't go there, but just so you know that it's there. We also have a walkthrough on how to write a letter to the editor. That is very powerful. It's a great way to advocate for an issue, to bring awareness to your community. And we have guides for both SSEP and T15 for anyone who might live along or closer to that route. Last couple of things before we go to Q&A and closing. Also, similar to letter to the editor, contacting your elected official is a great way to continue boosting awareness and letting the people who you voted into office know your concerns. You put them in office, they're there for you, they should be advocating for you. And an important part of making sure they can do that is letting them know how you feel. So always worth speaking up. We have bullet points on how to engage, what to say, and you can even find your representative's contact info using this link. The last thing is probably the easiest one because you don't have to do anything. You just get a cool yard sign. You can fill out a form, request a yard sign. That is, again, a great way to let people directly in your community know what's going on. They also know how you feel about it. It could be a great way to create some neighborhood bonds. And I think these are all awesome ways to get involved. Again, can all be found in our in the engagement guide by CCAN as well. And with that, I'll stop sharing and give it back to Jess.
Thanks so much, Claire. I also want to flag, from that page, as Claire showed you, there's a quick and easy petition that you can sign as your first step. That's hosted by 7 Directions of Service. Other organizations are circulating petitions at this time too, including Appalachian Voices. So we'll follow up with those links. But it's really multiple ways that you can weigh in, and you are not limited to just one comment in the FERC docket. You can submit as many as your heart desires, and we encourage you to do so. I had some about the comment period length, and I'll submit a separate comment with specific concerns about the Dan River. So I encourage you to stay active on that docket. If you like getting emails, you can subscribe to the docket. That's less appealing, but that keeps you kind of up to speed with all the filings that are coming through. So at this time, I'm going to stop the recording, and then we're actually going to open it up for questions, and then time to start formulating our own comments, and then maybe see if anybody gets a chance to submit one that we can see post in real time. So let me thank you again for being here this evening, and I'm going to stop the recording.